You're listening to Well, I Laughed, Part 2 of Identity Theft. Hit, stay, pray. Hey, I wasn't sure if we were going to start or...
Sit here quietly.
Well, I figured we wouldn't start video content until your toes were covered. Until you put those dogs away.
Ew.
Oh, that was the line. Okay.
Don't talk about my dogs like that. How was your day, Grant?
My day was good. I was a little tired. It was a late night last night of no fault of my own, but that's fine. We love family, and that's important.
That's cute.
That's really important. No, it's been a good day. I threw this shirt on before I came over because I was just wearing like a house shirt before, like cooking, doing some cleaning, finishing up today's story and stuff. And I remembered as I put this on, I wore this shirt on one of the first Zoom calls of the pandemic. Oh. And I was like really washed naked. Out. Yeah. Right. And so they couldn't see. The
shirt is like beige, right. Listener.
And so this is also me just like kind of very casually throwing it into this conversation. I have a shirt on. See, ooh, my skin can't normally do that. It doesn't normally have a pocket square. And
this camera is like
really good.
A lot of megapixels.
I know, but their phones might not be. That might be Androids.
I found out something fun today. So Spotify like crashed or whatever this morning. And then I went in to try and upload the video for this week's episode because I try and do that like a few days after it's published. And now it won't let us upload video that's more than like 60 gigabytes or something like that. Plot twist for all of you out there. Most of our episodes are more than that.
What's a rough number?
It depends on the length. I think last week, so the Meet the Chans was 80, 90?
Okay.
Yeah. So
not great for long form podcasting.
TBD if like I went back and looked and I was like, no, every other video I have uploaded has been more than that. So that must be a new thing. I assume it's because of
might have been why it crashed.
Whatever crashed.
Whoa, this is crazy. We didn't plan on hosting this many videos. What are we, YouTube right now?
Yeah,
That's
so
funny.
Sorry for all of you guys who liked the videos on Spotify. Write into your local Spotify representative and let them know that you're upset because apparently I can't upload anymore.
That's a good chord to strike for today's episode, just in general. Like, just write into your local governmental officials and hold them accountable.
Okay, I was talking about Spotify, but sure.
He said right into your local Spotify offices.
Yeah, I mean, fair enough.
This is also you finding out that I am doing the Titanic today. I'm kidding, of course I'm not doing the Titanic today.
I was like, I'm not emotionally ready.
You asked me, I told you a question to prepare for tonight's episode. Yes. You said, why do I feel like you're doing the Titanic? I said, ha 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 ha.
No, this is a different.
Oh, okay. I was like, ha 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 ha. And then you said, Connect 4. So I just wasn't sure where you were.
I was talking about the battle ropes because you were like, in general with cardio, I agree. Or something like that. And then it felt like you had another thing to say. And I was like, okay, why do I feel like you're about to bring up the Titanic?
Oh, no, that's so funny. Listener, earlier today when I was finishing up today's story, Maya was like, what are we even doing with this cardio thing? What's going on here? What's happening?
I was mad.
And it's like, yes, I've been saying this. I am very much on the record being like, your workouts
I like cardio.
Are intense.
Most of my workouts are strength workouts. You can ask Jacob. We both did die a little today.
Jacob went today? Oh, I'm sure I'm going to hear about it because I get an update from him every now and then. But when you really push him, I find out. Yeah.
I didn't push him at all today. I think he knows that like strength workouts are where I vibe.
Right.
And this is like, please kill me right now.
We, I think me, Jacob, and Lydia are planning on watching Secret Millionaire tomorrow. Obviously, you're welcome to join. I think we're 3 episodes in.
Okay.
We had to stop when Lydia was traveling for work. And so it's like the show that we're watching together.
Yeah, I would love it. Even if I'm not caught up, I just like being around.
Okay. It's
people.
also, you'll be shocked to find this out. As a reality show, not a lot of plot you got to get caught
That's
up
fair,
on.
yeah.
You know? But that also means you get to help with recycling day activities
Never mind,
tomorrow.
I'm not in.
Yay,
Nope.
recycling.
I never committed actually
Positive
to anything.
reinforcement.
No.
Excellent.
You're gonna owe me a lot more before that. Mm-hmm.
Other news, I honestly today ended up being kind of a little boring after what yesterday was like. For those of you who listened to last week's Patreon episode, I'm here to give you an update. Today is the day after we recorded last week's Patreon episode.
Mm-hmm.
0 pepperoncinis today. But that's only because I got a little sweet treat for lunch at a local bakery. And by A, I mean plural.
Yes, of
and
course.
just like truly have not been hungry. Not because I'm like, dainty, I'm a little piece of dust. No, that's how many sweet treats I got. I'm just like,
sweet
I'm
treats
not
at her
hungry
bakery
anymore.
are so
They're so amazing.
good.
And then I got the mozzarella salami sandwich that has all this great arugula and like this, like, it's like a veggie salad with like eggplant and stuff. It's so good. And it's on a focaccia, which is just amazing.
I'm not a huge fan of like breakfast sandwiches. I can't do like big breakfasts normally because my stomach can't handle it. But like, I don't remember when it was like when I went there with Mason a month or so ago and I got my first like sandwich from there and I was like, oh.
Yeah, you get it.
Okay. Yeah.
They're like, oh, this is why this sandwich costs this much money and doesn't even come with a bag of like Vicks vinegar and chips.
And also like it's enough for me to like have a couple of meals out of.
Different people. Like for me, I'm full. It's like good.
I can't
it's
eat
one
much
good meal
for breakfast.
No, I know.
If it was lunch or dinner, it'd be different. Or like munchy time.
Just try not to lead them astray. It's Get Right's Bakery in Denver. If you trend towards me, you can definitely get full. If you trend more towards mine, you can be full for a couple of days. I think that's fair. I think that's an accurate assumption.
I went and I like checked Find My Friends to see if Sophie was in the office before I went to the bakery. And so I was like, do you like baked goods? And she was like, yeah. And I was like, sweet or savory? And she was like, sweet. And then we just like, I got like a bomba and then, or bombolone, I think is what it's called. And then a, like a little tart thing. And then I was like, which one do you want? And she was like, can we
split them both in half?
And share? Yeah. And then all the like little straight men were like,
what's this?
Wait,
are there donuts in the break room?
Yeah, and my like little desk mate Colin, not little, my desk mate Colin was just like, I offered some to him and I was like, do you want to try a bite of these? He's like, they're really good. And he was like, I will, just because it seems like you're not being sarcastic.
I don't know. I feel weirdly safe right now. So yes, I will.
Yeah. It's like, okay, I'm glad for whatever that was.
We have state testing this week for those of you being like, why is Grant able to go get, and it's honestly, state testing is awful except when it's not.
Except when you're not doing all the
right, when I'm not the person that has to do it all. Honestly, I kind of love state proctoring because it's so meditative because you're not really allowed to do a bunch of stuff. And so you just kind of like, you know?
Smooth brain.
Yeah. I love not being responsible for anything and being able to have my phone on airplane mode because it has to be on airplane mode.
That is kind of nice.
It was really nice. Never loved the hour afterwards when it's like, oh my God.
Yeah. No, that's fair. That's super fair.
But it was good. Yeah.
I believe it was last week's episode where I told you what my elementary school's board said on like the way home. It was YOLO, JK, or LOL, JK, BRB or something like that.
Jesus.
Yeah, so the one that I saw this week, where is it? It was on tax day. So it said, tax day, invest here for 100% return.
I saw that too.
I was like, no.
Wait, that was your church?
That was my elementary school.
That one?
Yeah.
Oh, it is crazy how much we are in your
You live like walking distance from my high school. It's upsetting.
No, I know it is. I have to swerve around those kids when I'm driving dangerously through the neighborhood.
One time I had a panic attack and ran through that whole neighborhood. So my first panic attack ever.
Because the school district I work for is in that school district, so the schedules are off sometimes. And so I was driving home one day and they were getting done and someone in like a either a vintage Vespa or an illegal street motorbike was like weaving through people and stuff.
Gosh.
And part of me is like, I'm not sure if you're like the coolest kid at that school or the weirdest one, you know?
And mine's always had a unicycle kid, so
I love that so much, actually. I was gonna be like, Nebraska did too, and then I was like, no, we didn't. No, we were a state school.
I think there was a unicycle kid that graduated, and then a new one cropped up.
Good.
At least that's how I
hope there was a ritual.
Yeah, I hope that like they passed down like a unicycle part or something. But yeah, there was always a unicycle kid.
We had, I don't know if you were even around on the internet when this was a meme, but skateboarding professor. Where it's just like old guy. That was a professor at the University of Nebraska. And he did legitimately skateboard to class.
We had a professor. You have to ask Casey about this one. Apparently he was a great professor. And he was a pretty avid biker. And then he got into an accident. And he was tenured.
No.
And he no longer good professor, but everyone still was like, but he's integral to the physics department.
No, and that's tough because obviously we want him to still be able to have work, but his job is literally to impart knowledge on others.
Yeah, and he taught
TBI's TBI, man. You know,
like
traumatic brain injury is traumatic brain injury. If I've learned anything from The Pit on HBO Max, it's that.
I think honestly he was probably still really smart, but like he was just impossible to deal with. Like because I'm not a physics person, and so there was one time he was subbing for my professor because I always made sure to not have him because I had heard just like people who don't understand physics, like you're screwed if you get this guy.
Right. And
anyway, he subbed for my professor and he was like, he started the class with Hangman. Okay. And the answer was don't get sick. Because our professor had gotten sick. We played the whole game.
Played it through.
Yeah. And then there was another one. I cannot remember what the question was or what it was, but at some point we were talking about Oreos. And this is like a gen ed lecture. Like there are hundreds of children in this, adults, I guess, technically. But I told him how I eat Oreos or like that I'm okay eating them both like as a cookie and then
and split him in half.
And he like pretended to get on the phone on like the landline in the room to like call security on me. I was like,
as a person who's
anyway, torque.
As a person who's always doing little bits in the classroom, it's really tough to see a person try to do it and not succeed. Like it's tough.
It's like we have
it's an art.
So much material to get through in this like 50 minute class, and you have wasted 20 minutes of it threatening me for the way that I eat Oreos.
Why are you coming for the way that I teach classes? I don't know why you're so upset about that.
Because I have to pass gen ed physics.
True. When you teach in electives, the stakes are a little bit lower. I didn't say that. What was I going to say? Something about here's the thing too. Okay, so listener, last night, one of the reasons why I'm so tired today is because I got the always a privilege chance to hang out with my sister who is in town for a Red Rocks concert. I got a chance to hang out with her after the Red Rocks concert. Was that the only time on this entire trip that I saw her or that she even let me know like where she was and invited me to join her? Yes. Am I mad about that? Not really, but it's just is what it is, right? Yeah. So at like 1:30 in the morning, I'm trying to go home. 1:30 in the morning, I'm stone cold sober and I have been there for 35 minutes to give you a picture as to like what this evening was like.
Ooh.
I'm trying to leave. My sister is in her fog post-concert, remembering things about her brother. And she goes, oh, that's right. You're in grad school right now. How's that going? And then her friend, and again, all grace extended in the world, it's after a Red Rocks concert. They are knuckles deep into some In-N-Out burger when they say this.
Yeah.
But he goes, oh man, you're in grad school right now? I loved being in grad school, which the face I could not make to him.
Yeah.
And he goes, it was just so nice to be around other like intellectuals, you know, and not all these like dimwits. And he's like licking like Thousand Island dressing off his hand as he says it.
Not
and
around all these dimwits.
And I'm like,
sir.
I fully agree. You right now, perfect vessel for that message. Thank you so much for it. I am sure you are sharp as a tack in the light of day, but right now,
this feels ironic.
It feels like a pot yelling, I hate kettles.
Yeah. Kettles are really dumb.
Exactly.
Oh my God. Remember the story Lydia and Jacob told us last night about the small business that they own?
Oh, yes. Yes, I do. Do you have an
That's
update?
in my note. No, I don't.
Okay.
We got drinks last night. Lydia just got back from working at the Masters. She organizes some stuff for big events like that. But when they got back, they had to deal with some things with their small enterprises. One of which being a storage facility of sorts. And she showed us, or she like recounts this call that she got from this guy who's like works on his car in his storage unit and is just like, hey, there's like a hole in the ceiling and it looks like someone, what did she say? Like,
I saw claws and a jaw come
Yes.
through and then eyes.
yeah. And Lydia thought it was a human, which is the most insane thing.
It's honestly like she is so afraid someone is living up there. Does she
Yeah.
have any proof? Does she need it?
No. Dear listener, it was a raccoon or a possum. Like, but she showed us the picture and it's just like ceiling material kind of like hanging around a gaping hole.
It like ate its way through the ceiling.
We were all just like miming a raccoon like through the ceiling.
Well, and I was like, what's your ceiling situation like up there at that business lid? And she goes, oh, no idea. I've never been up there.
Oh, well, maybe that's why you're scared of it. Okay, cool.
What was I going to say on that topic? Oh, here's the thing, too. Love her to death. If we're talking about that work trip.
Yeah.
She was anti-gambling in March, if you remember correctly.
She's been to Blackhawk a lot since then.
Has she?
She went like a couple weeks ago, didn't she?
Oh, but that was with a friend's thing. It was like a social event she couldn't get
gambling.
out of.
Oh,
No, I know.
sure. She's been to Blackhawk on her own, too. Lydia.
She was opposed to doing our March Madness bracket pool, and then as soon as she got to
funny.
Augusta, threw $10 into the pot
Yes.
for like the.
Yes.
And I haven't pointed that out to them yet because we're just still like reveling in her victory. But for a woman who knows nothing about golf, like Lydia doesn't watch golf.
No.
Like she likes the Masters, but that's because it's like culturally an event, not because she's like a lover of golf. I mean, she's a tennis playing business owner, not a golf playing business owner. If that helps you
They're
understand.
different. Yeah. Very different.
She's girl coded in that way.
Yes.
And so the fact that she beat 60 other like rabid golf fans to win the pool, like I am proud of her, even if it does make her a hypocrite. And that's why I love her.
I mean, she may have phoned a friend.
Oh, really?
Maybe. I don't know.
Are you the friend?
No.
I want to say, do you know a lot about golf? Like I'm like, what did you know and when, Maya?
No. I know nothing, but I may have had some insight into a friend that she phoned.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Well, use your resources.
Yeah,
you know?
I mean, if it's there, I don't think it was against the rules. Did you see?
Did you send me a 4 in the row move while we were on air?
Did I? Yeah, maybe.
Okay. No, you 100% did.
Okay,
Great,
cool.
wonderful,
Yeah.
amazing.
I'm gonna kick your ass. Grant made some threats, and now I'm holding him to that. And I have beat him once.
I've also like actively been busy today, but that's
Okay,
fine.
sure. That sounds like an excuse. If you had won, you've been like, and also I was busy
right.
today.
I would have been like, and I was working with a handicap. I would agree. I agree with that.
All
Were you
I'm
going to say
saying
something? I
is-
was opening up my page, my notes for.
That's a very blank page.
There's a headline that I need to remember
Okay.
because it's a potential title for today.
Did you see the new Hunger Games book released?
The book, yes, I saw the book's been released.
Yes, because that's going to be our next book club book, so none of us have actually gotten into it.
Right.
But there is a young Effie Trinket
Ooh,
in the book.
Really?
And they've cast her. It's the best casting
Who
ever.
did they cast for it?
Elle Fanning.
Hell yes.
No, that's like, you can't get any
There's
better
a
than
certain type of pale people. That's so good, actually.
that. Also, last thing that I have anyway. Oh, sorry, second to last thing that I have. Did you see Steve Irwin?
No. I saw Robert Irwin, though.
Sorry, Steve Irwin's son? I was like, Steve Irwin's son?
Yeah. I didn't know you're down for some of these down bad posts. I would send them to you all the time.
Oh, I'm deep in that.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. I think he's selling underwear. I'm not really sure.
It could really be anything.
Could be selling underwear. Could be
a nursery.
It's a John Mulaney quote.
Oh my God. Okay. last story that I have.
Oh, that was it. We just needed a moment
I
of
just needed to
recognition
talk
for Robert
about
Irwin.
Robert Irwin,
All of his interviews mentions that he, quote, hasn't found a partner yet, and that he imagines he's going to spend his life with someone. And I'm like, come out our bi king.
Yeah.
Right?
No, there's no way that man is not bi.
Right.
The way he handles a snake, get out of here. Come on.
This is a family programming.
Yeah,
imagine if this was family
he
programming.
Educates about snakes. What are you trying to say, Grant?
Nothing at all.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I recently had to do day of event coordinating for a friend who lost their a loved one in their life, and they were in charge of doing a lot of the estate managing and like planning the actual memorial service. So I offered to like do the day of stuff. And so that was fun. Like not fun obviously, but like satisfying to like do the event planning and like get through all of that. I did have a few people that I had asked her like point blank, is there anyone you don't want to talk to you? Right. Because she's going through it. The last thing she needs, she already like does not want to like placate other people and their emotions. Right. And so I'm like, I get you're like emotionally tired. Is there anyone that like me and the rest of your friends that'll be there can help you by keeping them away from you? So I got a couple pictures and I literally showed them to Casey and Jess before. I was like, this is our blacklist.
It's that scene from The Devil Wears Prada.
Yeah, I was like, keep an eye on these two, especially, and then these other people that we like knew more about. And they were like, good, yeah, got it, cool. And so I'm running the event a little bit and I'm trying to keep an eye, but I'm also trying to find people that are like gonna be saying the eulogies, which is hard because my friend that I'm doing the event planning for hasn't met some of them, so actually doesn't know what they look like. Sure. And so I'm trying to find certain people. I'm like, hey, do you know where Janice is? Do you know if Janice is gonna come? Can you describe her for me? And also like the Wi-Fi is really bad, or like the service is really bad. My friend is trying to load photos on her Facebook, but can't like get them to load. And so anyway, there's all of that. But at some point towards the end of the memorial, we're all gathered around. They did like ice cream instead of booze. And so we're all gathered around like eating ice cream. Most of the people have left by that point. And I was like, I don't know if I saw like person 1 or person 2 that I had like the photos of.
Right.
And Casey just goes, oh, I did. And I was like, what? And he was like, yeah, I mean, like you said you didn't like really need, I checked in every once in a while, but he was just like, it
is the scene from The Devil Wears Prada.
It was at the Botanic Gardens, to give you an idea. So it's like kind of a very open outdoor layout. And so whenever Casey like wasn't checking in with me or checking in with my friends or whatever, he was sitting by himself with a cup of iced lemon water across from this like koi pond area near some tulips and had just like snipered the people that I had told him to look out for, all under the guise of just like taking a moment for himself, and he just knew exactly where these people were. And I was like, Jesus Christ.
Casey, I need my best people with me at the Botanical Gardens. It's the biggest event of the year.
Yeah.
That list no longer includes Maya. Tell her now, or I'll assume you're not serious about this. I know too many lines from that movie.
Good. Well, we're all preparing.
I know. And a really chill, like easy way,
like not a big deal,
very casual kind of way. Absolutely.
My other favorite thing about this, so I knew that Casey was kind of sitting off to the side, just like he loves the Botanic Gardens. He is Ferdinand the Bull. Him and Bowser both are like if you look at him from a distance, you're like, okay. And then like you talk to them for 5 minutes, like, no, you kind of just want to sit outside and like look at something pretty.
And that's why he married Maya.
And that's why I'm here, I guess. But so he was sitting across the way while we were all kind of chatting. And there's this kid. So the person who passed used to work in the NICU. And so some of the people that got invited to the memorial were families of children that she had helped save.
Sure.
And so there's like a bunch of kids there, and it's very sweet, like truly so heartwarming. There's this one kid, though, I don't remember what his name was, but he was fucking hysterical. At one point, we're all eating dinner. It's like the end of like the service, and now it's just for the rest of the time going to be kind of like mingling and stuff.
Right.
And so me and my friends are kind of eating the dinner before we like get ready for whatever's next. And this kid just like kind of rounds the corner and like points up at me and goes, I saw you. Like Timmy Turner voice. I swear to God. And I was like, oh yeah, you did? He was like, yeah, you were up there. Like referring to like where the mics were and all this stuff. And I was like, I was. And he was like, hey mom. And just like ran away.
I think it's wonderful you getting a chance to interact with young children because
so
between the two of
funny.
us, it's like very clear which one of us I think has more of those interactions than others. I love this for you.
100%.
Yeah.
There was another moment though towards the end where Casey was sitting off to the side. I'm like talking to my friends, and then the kid. There's not a ton of people, but he had this like red Lego fire truck with him, and he tripped and it broke. And he handled it in a much better way than I was expecting. Like I was purely ready to like have my eardrums burst from this kid screaming, and he just kind of like was sad, but like he got over it kind of. But there was definitely some crying and a little bit of yelling involved. And the way I was just kind of like looking at my phone, looking back to the kid, and then just like bing, and a text from Casey, who is overdoing his like fucking spy
thing again.
bullshit. Just goes, I'm never having children. Okay. Yeah, that's my story. I don't know.
Good. So a lot of kind of big group time for you, which explains why the next day when I saw you, you were like, hey. And I was hey, a little drained.
So tired. I was like, I need literally anyone to ask me how I'm doing. If you ever get that way, you're like,
should we record Patreon at different times? Is now not a good time to be funny?
Okay, don't act like it wasn't beneficial for you.
I mean, it was convenient, but I could have made it work.
Oh my God,
I mean, I barely got that assignment in, but like I made it work. Killing it, by the way. That's the tough thing. I just work so well under pressure that it's really hard for me to do good work not under pressure, because my focus just clears up so well.
Are you sure you don't have any kind of ADHD?
No, I'm not sure of at all.
Okay, there it is.
I did the first of 3 assignments while actively watching The Pit, and then our Dave's Hot Chicken order arrived. And at this point, I had 90 minutes and 2 assignments. And I was like, well, I'm not going to like let this go cold.
Yeah,
I'm going to eat it.
Obviously.
What's it going to take? 15 minutes? Right? Got it in. I'm averaging a 94% on those assignments right now.
I'm actually pretty convinced grad school is not serious.
Yeah, I agree.
It's like a silly time.
We've hit on a lot of topics today that's going to be part of today's episode.
Oh.
And I'm going to use that as a segue.
Oh, a segue.
Does that work for you?
Yeah, that's fine.
All right. Let me pull up because there was a certain way I wanted to like start this.
Okay.
Maybe not your part, but definitely my part. Also, today's episode, it was one of those episodes where it's like you start writing it and like just collect all the notes. And then at one point,
and then
I'm
you have to like end up organizing
right,
it. Yeah.
I was staring at it and it was so poorly organized that I had to start a new section at the very bottom that says, okay, officially start here. And then I had to like pull things down into it. And then it ultimately
I did
made
that
its
for
way
Wicked
back up.
and I've done that for a lot of it. I like make 2 separate documents
Yeah.
and just like copy paste.
Yeah. Okay. So, Maya, I asked you earlier today to come up with a plan for how you would flee to Canada if you needed to. So, what is your answer? How would you flee to Canada? And listener, I asked her to put it in narrative form.
I have follow-up questions. Like, am I just fleeing for the sake of like getting out of the United States, or am I fleeing and avoiding detection?
A great question. Kind of a little bit of both. You don't need to be full on like new name, new identity, whatever.
Okay.
But you don't want to go to Canada and be loud about it.
Okay. Am I worried about people tracking me to Canada?
Do you count the U.S. government as people?
Yes.
Probably not. They wouldn't like break into Canada. That you don't necessarily want Canada to give. You don't want to give Canada a reason to give you back to the Americans, though.
Okay. I think that clears up my answer quite a bit then, because I was fully figuring out like, okay, I'm going to take out some money. I'm going to start selling things like several months in advance, get a bunch of cash, and then slowly, as I'm like making my way over, transfer that into Canadian dollars, and then
God, sorry.
Yeah.
The exchange rate is just awful.
Oh yeah, of course it is. That's not real money, I'm actually pretty sure. But if it's not like that deep, like I'm assuming I'm not worried about like credit cards being traced. Okay, so I am worried about credit cards being traced.
If I was in your position, I might be opening up Canadian credit cards in Canadian banks.
Okay. So yeah, so same plan. Several months before, start selling things to get a bunch of cash, hopefully over like Facebook Marketplace and demanding cash, and then also slowly and inconspicuously taking out cash from my bank account so that it's not super detectable. And I'm assuming Casey and the dogs are coming with me. If not, that does become a lot more difficult.
Casey and the dogs are coming with you.
We are. Okay, they are coming with me. We still might try and dye our hair. We'll see.
Cut it off. It's the most liberating thing. You still haven't answered the question, though.
Yeah. How would I get there?
Sure. Or which city are you going to? Assuming that you're going to a city. You don't strike me as a farmer.
My brain went Nova Scotia because I figured that would be like an
real
easy
desolate.
spot to like, I don't know, start a life as like a farmer or like
interesting,
like a fisher or something like that.
See, I take the exact opposite approach. Put me in a place with a lot of people where a new person can just blend in.
A lot of people, a lot of cameras.
Sure, but
tight-knit communities ain't giving you up.
Right, tight-knit communities are also like, for an outsider, who are you? You're not related to anyone.
Okay,
here.
And I'm charming and will worm my way into their hearts when I save the local bakery in this Hallmark movie.
Yeah, and I'm not going to say anything else about my lived experiences with rural communities to pop that bubble for you.
Listen, the guy that we did the Backroads trip, who like Casey got along really well with, he was like an older gentleman doing like his first solo trip after retirement. He was from Nova Scotia, and he showed us lots of like videos and pictures of just like the life he lives out there. And also I do think Canadians are a little different from Americans, just like in general.
I'd probably agree with that too.
Yeah.
Well, solid answer.
Thank you.
Because, well, for more than a decade, this fun little question was more than a hypothetical one for thousands of Americans. From 1964 to 1975, so about 11 years, roughly 30,000 American men fled to Canada to avoid being drafted into the Vietnam War. Roughly similar amounts of women, often accompanying these men, also fled to Canada, representing a migration of almost 60,000 young Americans to Canada.
Damn. Okay, in that case, I would go to a big city.
Yeah.
I didn't think it was going to be like
the Vietnam War. Yeah. Which is why I'm like,
I thought like I commit a crime and now the government is after me.
If you move to Canada illegally, you have, and also by evading the draft in the U.S., you have.
Yeah.
But like Canada was like, what? All these Americans? Yeah, we'll get to America. We'll get there.
Shh, don't worry, baby.
Sweden was literally like, come, we'll shelter you. Come. And Canada was like, I
don't know.
No, it's okay.
Yeah. I mean, we can't do anything about it right now.
My mom's not home. Come back later. Kind of moment. But see, here's the thing, Maya. Leaving the country wasn't the only way to resist the war effort. Of course, there were marches and sit-ins. There is that famous photo of the man putting a flower stem in the barrel of a rifle of a National Guard soldier, right? It was the Vietnam War. And it was during this war that America saw its kind of loudest, most public anti-war movement ever. Movements that we're no longer surprised to see today, but whose organization, public support, and like veracity was very new to America in the 1960s and 70s.
Right.
But here's the thing. For some, these actions weren't enough. And there was a strong desire to commit something they called nonviolent direct action. And so, on October 27th, 1967, 4 activists walked into a draft board office in Baltimore, Maryland, and asked the clerk to see the draft files. They were trained as draft counselors, or people who you could interact with if you were like looking for an exception or things like that. Okay. So the clerk gives them access to the files, which is super common. Like that's not shocking. Then these activists uncover the bottles of Mr. Clean they had hidden in their coats and pour the bottles all over the files. The bottles of Mr. Clean were actually filled with blood, symbolically spilling blood over the government paperwork that was used to force American men to fight in the war. The blood had the added bonus of ruining the cards.
Yeah.
And preventing them from being used. After destroying the files, the activists then waited to be arrested. When the police arrived, rather than finding long-haired hippies waiting for them, They instead found Catholic priest.
Whoa.
This week's episode is about a resistance movement known as the Draft Board Office Raids, a movement that viewed opposition to the war in Vietnam as the only honest expression of Christian faith in the face of the conflict, and a movement that destroyed, by some counts, close to 1 million draft cards.
Whoa.
Mostly using fire and prayer. And that's what we're going to talk about today.
Hellfire! Hellfire! I don't actually know the lyrics.
So the connection to identity theft is quite obvious. They literally steal these identity cards from government offices and burn them just to kind of get that out of the way. Now that's the connection.
Mystery?
That was still a hilarious episode, by the way.
It just was not a mystery.
Yeah, it just didn't quite go the way I thought it was going to at the start.
Theme.
No, but we had fun. Okay, so first, a trigger warning. Trigger warnings for this episode. This episode is mostly free of graphic descriptions of war and violence. However, there are mentions to the war crimes the U.S. government has and was committing at the time. So if that might be particularly triggering for you, especially in Central America or Southeast Asia, you might want to skip this episode.
Oh,
okay. So with that, we're going to start. And this was actually the really tough thing. I'm like, where do I start this story? Dan Carlin is one of my favorite history podcast people. And he did an episode. It was so funny. He did an episode on Alexander the Great. And he started off that podcast series about 400 years and 2 episodes before Alexander was born. And he was like, the tough thing about like understanding the event that happens right before Alexander comes onto the scene is you got to know the one before. And like, you got to know
the one before that, and the one before that.
And he goes, you just end up kind of chasing history down this rabbit hole until you can find some place to start your story.
Right.
I also felt like a challenge with this episode because, you know, the Vietnam War is recent enough that it's not probably right. It's living memory for some, not necessarily for you and I, but it's like even within history, usually your classes got to it at the end of your time in school. You know, it's still discussed about at times. So I was like, where do I start this story? Especially with that headline kind of giving away like the action of it, right? Which is that there's a war going on.
It's a cold open.
Right, exactly. So we're going to talk very, very briefly about a history of Indochina, also known as Southeast Asia.
Oh, hell yeah.
This is just also kind of a repeat of what I said during, it was the Frank Sinatra episode, right?
Sure.
When did you ask me about the Vietnam War?
I'd never asked you about the Vietnam War.
Didn't you?
Did I? I don't think so. I asked you about China.
That might be it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just like overarching.
Oh, was that the Jackie Chan episode? Oh, maybe that's what I was thinking of then.
No, it might have been, no, because I talked about poison and we talked about how they could be used as biowarfare, but I don't think we got into Vietnam.
Okay. So we're going to talk very briefly about Southeast Asia and Indochina. There's a bunch of different places there. You probably know some of them by their dead names, right? So like Burma and Saigon, or Siam. Burma is now Myanmar. Siam is now Thailand. And Saigon is now Ho Chi Minh City.
Okay.
So those are former names of these places. And all 3 of these countries have really interesting relationships with each other, and their histories go back, obviously, thousands of years. Vietnam, more so than some of these other countries in Southeast Asia, has a history of being directly controlled by China or influenced from a distance.
Okay.
That's crucial to know.
Right.
Because China becomes communist in 1949, I think if I get the date right. And it's around that time France is like, no, boo-hoo, we know fascism's bad, but we still want our own colonies. We hate it when we're oppressed, but we would like to be oppressing others. And the British and the British and the Americans are like, yeah, girl, obviously.
Get your tits out.
Get your colonization out. Absolutely. And so France is fighting to maintain its control in Southeast Asia over the countries we now know as like Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam. Eventually they lose that war and they leave. And one of the things that happens is Vietnam itself gets split in half, North and South Vietnam, with the North electing, implementing becoming a communist country and the South becoming at least nominally democratic.
Right.
The South was, most importantly, an ally of the U.S. and did not say they themselves were communist, which is all America needed.
Jesus.
And that's, without being like too flippant about it, the extent of why the U.S. gets involved in Vietnam to begin with.
Okay.
The U.S. wants to support South Vietnam because it does not want South Vietnam to become communist. The fear is if South Vietnam becomes communist, Vietnam will be unified into a communist country. Laos and Cambodia will then become communist. Thailand will become communist. And then Myanmar, at the time known still as Burma, will become communist. And then if that happens, India becomes a communist country. And now you have a majority of the world's population under communism. It's called the domino theory. And it drove all of U.S. foreign policy for half a century.
Was North Korea already communist?
Correct. Okay. But South Korea had the ceasefire line and was officially like a U.S. ally.
Okay.
So we had stopped it in Korea.
When did that split happen?
The 50s.
Okay.
I mean,
so
the split happens
the
right after the war,
yeah.
but then there's a conflict, and then the conflict rages on into like late 1940s, early to mid 1950s.
Okay. Sorry, I've had a lot of very inappropriate thoughts that I should not be saying out loud.
It's okay.
There's one of the from the history of the world where he's talking about like Korea's history, and they're like, and then they fight, and then they take a break, which lasts forever.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's the history of Southeast Asia in a nutshell, and why the U.S. is there. I say all of this to kind of point something out. There is no Pearl Harbor moment like we get in World War II. There's no sinking of the Lusitania like we get in World War I. There is no remember the Maine like we get in like the Americans, the Spanish-American War. Like there's no like triggering event that America can really point to. We just did not want South Vietnam to become communist. And when we started off on that road, we hadn't decided what our ceiling was for what we were willing to support. Okay. And then it became this whole theory, like the sunk cost theory. And because I want to read my notes for a second, what's the sunk cost theory, Maya?
That once you spend money, it doesn't make sense to talk about, like, was it good to spend that money, or should I use the thing that I spent the money on? The money has been spent. It is no longer yours.
Right. And I will keep spending money, or in the case of the U.S. government, lives, personnel, resources, international reputation, to make sure I get what I want, even though my investment now into this is way beyond the actual value. Yeah. Right.
And that's why I get Starbucks a lot more flippantly after I've loaded my Starbucks card on my app. Yeah. Well, that money's not mine anymore.
As soon as I figured out I could in-app buy myself a gift card and get 2 times the stars, I was like, that just makes money sense. And then I was like, no, because then I'll be like, oh, don't worry, I have money on my gift card. I can get the Starbucks, but it was my money the entire time. Sunk cost theory, man. I can't be doing it. I haven't done it yet. I'm walking away. I'll probably do it at nationals, but that's okay.
Okay.
That
seems fair. Yeah, that seems fair.
Okay, so that's a history of Southeast Asia in a nutshell, and why the U.S. is in Vietnam. I just wanted us to have that theory in case it was like, don't be bad mouthing America, because the Vietnam War is actually still really controversial for some reason.
Okay.
Like for instance, you really can't say in history classes still that like the U.S. lost the Vietnam War. Like that's like considered like highly inappropriate to say.
That's weird.
Yeah, I agree.
Because I don't think it's ever really been super clear to me that who won the Vietnam War.
Right. That was an intentional U.S. education decision.
That's wild.
Right. We literally had to evacuate our embassy personnel from the rooftop of our embassy via helicopters. I hate to say it, like winning the war doesn't look like that, you know?
Isn't there a movie about that?
There's lots of movies about that.
Okay, I was like, I've watched something. I think it might have been with Casey's parents like last year or something. Yeah,
but it's actually really interesting. Yeah. That specific evacuation is why we have the Near East Center and Little Saigon in Southwest Denver today. But that's a whole local history we can talk about at the end.
Okay.
So like America's there, we're fighting on behalf of South Vietnam, we're helping them out, we're spending lots of money, lots of people are dying. North Vietnam isn't quitting, which is lame of them because we thought they definitely would. Even though we keep like bombing all of their cities and stuff, it's not going well for us.
Oh my God.
And so that requires the US government to have more soldiers than it currently has in its army. And that's when we get to the part that we also need to explain to the listener, which is the draft. So I'm going to ask you this question.
Okay.
Are you registered for the draft?
I don't think so.
I don't believe you are.
I don't think I
think
am.
you're too old.
That's so fucked up of you to say.
I know, right?
I'm young and healthy.
I know women are allowed to serve in combat roles. I don't remember if women are now required to register with the selective service or not. The selective service is a fun generic name for the draft. That's what that means. We have not had a draft since the Vietnam War because of the kind of stories I was telling you at the start of today's episode. But you still have to actually register in case we ever want to do it. We'll have all the information we need, right?
Good.
Here's something that I learned today. All men who live in America, when they turn 18, have to register with the selective service. I thought I understood that. No, they mean even if you're here as an immigrant.
Oh my God.
You're still 3 years away from your green card? I would
actually like that information now, but it won't actually help with your citizenship.
To register. No, it won't help with your, but it's time for you to register. There's so many things that I want to talk about in today's episode that like mirror things that are happening actively like right now. Like, did you see that new Trump administration law that requires undocumented migrants to register with the government and then carry around documentation?
Fucking hell.
It's like bringing back an old rule that had been on the books but like hadn't been used in a while.
That's this administration's whole fucking thing. They're like, what is it? Illegal Aliens Act or foreign actors or whatever the fuck they're using to ship people off to El Salvador. But they're like, no, it's a law. Okay.
They're literally demanding that American individuals, people who live in America, some of them are dreamers, some of them were brought here when they were children, carry around identification paper that separates them from the general population. And the thing that separates them is not, did you pass a driving test or not? Yeah. But the thing that is, could we deport you at any second? Like, is that an avenue?
Why not just make them wear something on all their clothes?
You know, I saw one of my students who comes from a mixed like identity family between documented and undocumented make that exact comment on Instagram the other day.
Yeah, because seems like it'd be easier.
Which is also why I'm super excited to talk about today's episode. Like, it became increasingly more relevant the more and more news I read.
Did you see that at least there's been a couple of instances where people are crossing the border into the US or like going through customs, and customs agents have been going through their phones and detaining them if they have Trump administration?
I had not heard that, but I am so not shocked by that at all.
Yeah, the first couple times I saw it, I was like, that has to be clickbait, but it has continued to surface. So, I mean, maybe it's just like completely false, but I'm like, if I get stuck in Prague, babes, I get stuck in Prague.
Exactly. Well, no, the issue is you get stuck in like DIA customs house.
I get stuck in probably Dallas. Never mind. I don't want it to happen.
Yeah, exactly. Also on this, not going to say more than I need to, but we've had some really tough conversations at school with students who are trans and about dead names and issues that we did not have in the fall when these students traveled, and just how we are planning with their families to navigate a very different security state to now
that's wild.
In the spring semester. Yeah.
Are they going to have trouble traveling?
We're going to find out.
Great. Yep. Cool. Fun.
So all this is to say, the U.S. government is like, everyone needs to register for us. We're going to run a draft. And then as the U.S. continued to increase the number of soldiers it was sending out into the war, it needed more soldiers.
Shocking.
Because no one was trying to volunteer for a war against a country that never wronged us, against some philosophical concept like communism, right?
Yeah.
So they conducted in 1969 a draft lottery.
Cute.
Do you know how the draft lottery works?
I feel like I learned about it, but I couldn't tell you.
Okay. So at least for the very first draft drawing for the Vietnam War, it worked really simple. They had it in like a
Hunger Games style bingo thing.
Yeah, bingo thing that you turn, like a ball that had every single date in the calendar year on it. So like 366 dates. So like January 1st, January 2nd, January 3rd, etc. 366 because you have to include the leap years too, because there's like a window of time that they're looking at. And then they drew, and
If you were born on that day?
Correct. That was your order for draft. So do you want to know who in our friend group would be drafted?
Yes.
I'm not.
Actually, really bad.
I'm actually really embarrassed that this took me 20 minutes to gather. And I was like, this is so superfluous. This is not needed at all.
This is the kind of content I think we're all here for.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
And also one last thing. This is the last kind of infographic section. Once we're done with this section, we're getting right back into 1966, 67. There are some very, very interesting things that are going to happen. Some real crazy human interest stories that you can share at a party. History nerds, you're going to love it. Storytellers, you're going to love it. If you're like, this is full on just a TED Talk right now, I understand. But here is our list. Okay, so they draw 366 dates, right? And put them in order. They ultimately get all the way to number 195 on the list.
Oh my gosh.
About a little over halfway, if I'm doing that math very quickly in my head.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna say a name, and you're gonna go yes or no. Okay.
Oh, jeez.
Let's go with Tyler.
Yes.
No.
Oh man.
You.
No.
Yes. No. You're going to war. Oh, for 2 so far, girl. You're like fifth number called. I want you to.
Are you serious? I would not do well, guys.
All right. Griffin.
Yes.
Yes.
Hell yeah.
Me.
No.
Correct. Hey,
Hey!
getting better. Okay. Jacob.
No.
Correct.
Nice.
Lydia.
Yes.
That's scary. Yes. once you got it moderated, yes. So me, no. Griffin, yes. Tyler, no. You, yes. Jacob, no. Lydia, yes.
That's wild because there's so many birthday pairs that are really close together in that.
And that's what's always really interesting. In fact, there was this after the draft was done, there was this conspiracy because obviously it truly was random, which means there are going to be bunches.
Yes.
And bunches actually shows that it was random. Right.
Yeah. But people think that means it's not.
Yeah. So November and December birthdays, almost all of them were in the second half. And they were like, what's going on there? So much so they had to change the formula a little bit for the next year's draft to make sure that wouldn't happen.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That's terrifying.
And they aired it live.
Oh my god!
Yeah. So everyone literally
so now I'm really seeing where the Hunger Games came from.
Yep. Everyone sat down. Oh, here's a little fun tidbit that you didn't think about right away, but my friends who love Miss Lanahan from West Wing already know. Twins were drafted together.
Oh, that's
because they share a birthday.
Yeah. For a really long time, I wanted to work at the CIA or something, doing God, I can't remember what it's called. Criminal.
You're not nearly evil enough to work at the CIA.
Okay, thanks. I guess.
You're welcome. Literally, you're welcome.
But then at some point I heard, I assuming that it's not true, but they were like, they don't let only children be in dangerous positions.
Not true.
Yeah. And so my brain went, I can't be put in a dangerous position by looking back, I'm like, are you okay? The answer was no.
No, you definitely can be drafted. We'll go into the exceptions to being drafted. That was always...
I was talking about specifically spy work, CIA stuff. I don't think for the draft, no.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Okay. In 2010, the United States government repealed Don't Ask, Don't Tell, which was a real mixed bag for me.
Oh. What?
It was good that gays weren't going to be discriminated against in the military, but now I really was eligible for the draft. Yeah. Listen, I turned 18 before that, right? Did I turn 18 after that law got repealed?
In 2010?
Uh-huh. Because I graduated in 2011. Yeah, I would have been 18 afterwards. Never mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. But I was like, sorry, I can't serve. Okay, so we know how the draft works. We know there's a war in Vietnam, and we know why the U.S. is in Vietnam. And if you're like, Grant, I don't really know why the U.S. is in Vietnam. Boom, you got it.
I was literally just about to ask that.
Yeah, no, correct. You're like, why are we there?
I actually don't know.
Because if we're not killing poor Americans and rural Vietnamese people, in 10 to 15 years, India might be communist. And then where we be, Maya? And then where we be?
Maybe a little more socialist.
Well, I would rather set you on fire. So that's what we're going to do.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm begging you.
So, the war gradually escalates over time. It starts before Kennedy with Eisenhower, troops on the ground kind of land with Kennedy. It especially becomes true when LBJ takes president, where there's the chant, hey, hey, LBJ, how many boys did you kill today?
Right.
Or there's another one, and it's like, hey, hey, U.S. Empire, how many boys have expired? Like, it's like an attack on, and that was chanted by nuns outside the White House. And there's this really broad spectrum antagonism around the war in Vietnam that's hitting a bunch of different sectors of American society for a bunch of different reasons. So later on in today's episodes, we're going to talk a little bit about what it is that you could do to get out of the draft. But shocking no one, if you were a poor person of color, none of those were really options for you.
Yeah, shocking.
Right. And so you had really powerful movements like the civil rights movement at the time, who was openly very opposed to it because low income people could be sent off to war, and because of America's history of economic racism that disproportionately impacted Black and brown people, while also at the same time experiencing structural racism in the government that's trying to send them off to war.
Okay.
Like, for instance, we could send a Black person off to Vietnam in 1966, and they could be denied service in Alabama that same year.
Cute.
Alabama doesn't start putting Black football players on their football team until the 1970s. Like, just for like a spectrum of things. And so you have a very powerful civil rights movement that's like, this is messed up. You're having Black Americans go off and die when they do not enjoy liberties at home, which, by the way, is the exact same argument Black Americans made during World War II and made during World War I. And the only time we've ever really allowed Black Americans to serve was during the Civil War with like full equality before that point. And we were essentially like using them for additional manpower in hopes that we would terrify Southern whites. And then every promise we made to them during the Civil War, we did not keep. But besides the point, you also had other individuals.
What is this, Kendrick Lamar on the halftime show?
I don't understand. You have the Chicano political movement at the time that is experiencing a lot of the same things, especially places in the West like Denver, LA, Phoenix, San Francisco. Chicano is kind of a 1960s, 70s political term for kind of Hispanic American, Latino American activism. It gets more specific than that. I'm not going to get into more, but it's more specific than that. But you basically have this huge 20,000 person march in Los Angeles organized by Chicano leaders against the war. You have at this time an emerging Asian American civil rights movement going on at the time. Many of these are the children of Japanese Americans who had been interned. Yeah, like their parents were in internment camps and then had them basically right after the war. And now they are coming of age. They're 18, 19, 20, 21 years old. And suddenly this government that had put their parents in concentration camps are like...
Do you want to explain internment camps in case people
don't know? Great question. Sorry, because you could see me kind of getting worked up.
I was like, you just said concentration camps and you're going to freak people out.
Okay, so during World War II, the U.S. government, led by President Franklin Roosevelt, essentially imprisoned, I forget what the exact number was. I think it was somewhere around 30,000. Maybe it was less than that.
Yeah.
30,000 Japanese Americans who were in the United States legally, took them from their homes, sold off their businesses, left their homes abandoned, and put them in camps in places like Montana, Utah, New Mexico, because they were Japanese. And that was all America needed at the time to intern them. The fear was Japanese Americans couldn't be trusted to be loyal to the American government. Meanwhile, German Americans, Italian Americans,
all fine.
Like there was a handful who were like literally in charge of the American Nazi Party who get like kind of arrested. But other than that, like no suspicion. In fact, actually, if you were a German soldier during World War II who got captured by the U.S. government, you would then be put in German prisoner of war camps in like the heart of America, and were allowed to work on the local farms of local German Americans and enjoyed more personal liberties and freedoms than Japanese Americans in internment camps.
That's so fun. That's so
they
fun.
were prisons. It was not optional. It was guarded with wire and rifles. It was oftentimes cold and completely destroyed both generational wealth and community that Japanese Americans had established. Those people survived that experience, had children, and now the U.S. government was like, hey, we're going to take you away from your parents, second generation, we're going to do this, give you a weapon and demand that you now go kill other Asians in this world.
On behalf of a country that has like betrayed you.
Correct. I believe in the 1980s or 90s, like a very small reparation was made. That reparation might have just simply been an I'm sorry from the U.S. government. It's the only time we've ever even kind of attempted to like correct the wrongs of the past.
I think the law that allowed them to do that is the same law that the current administration is now using to
probably
deport people.
So when we're like, how bad could it get right now? Well, it's been bad. It's been bad, which as a silver linings person gives me hope. It's like we fought through it, like we took care of it, but also at the same time, I know what we're capable of. Like I know what it is. And like they're not going to call them concentration camps. They're going to call them immigrant processing centers. And then you're going to find out they're not processing anyone, that they're just like housing people there. And it's going to be our responsibility to monitor that, to demand action happens. And that in some instances, it's going to take more than just like marching the street. Like maybe it will take burning a couple thousand Teslas before the message gets across. We talk about that
Maybe it's
too.
time for political violence against my enemies.
You have a very strong Asian American movement that's starting to demand justice for their parents and grandparents, who are also have no interest in fighting for this government. So you have Asian Americans, you have African Americans, you have Mexican Americans, you have a growing youth movement, and then you also have, crucially in this, like a conscientious objector movement, right?
Yeah.
Beforehand, World War II, World War I, you had to belong to a very specific. Oh, actually, hold on, I might have notes. Okay. I
did a bunch of research on this story.
Me in class. Sometimes I'm not even joking. Okay. Americans are angry about all sorts of stuff, and there's definitely no agreement amongst Americans as to what specifically they're angry about. Again, some are angry about the inherent inequality of the draft system and like what you can do to get excluded from the draft and what you can't do. Some are angry that we are fighting the war in Vietnam specifically. Some people just aren't a fan of war in general. And those camps have a really hard time existing together.
Right.
Like we shouldn't be in Vietnam does not get along with the we shouldn't wage war group, because the in Vietnam group still like,
sometimes war is necessary.
And then meanwhile, there's some people in like the draft system where they're like, hell yeah, we all need to be fighting for this country, but we're not all fighting for this country.
Yeah.
So they're all anti this war under these circumstances.
But for
like
different reasons.
Correct. And that makes like coalition building really hard.
Yeah.
But it also means for our political leaders, it both makes it hard to resolve anyone's issues.
Right.
But it also makes it easy to crack, divide, and then play to certain groups to your own political interests. So keep that in mind. It's going to be like we're giving a guidebook today in today's episode about what we're going to expect to see over the next month to years.
But hopefully not, please.
Right. Because we're vigilant and we're watching. Okay. So here are some of the things that you could do to avoid the draft. So the first one, if you didn't want to be drafted, you could just volunteer for the military. But here's the thing. 85% of U.S. service members who served in Vietnam were with the Army or the Marines.
Okay.
And so if you wanted to avoid fighting and potentially dying in Vietnam, you joined a different branch, because if you were already in the military, they can't put you in the military
again.
And so the Air Force, Navy, and Coast Guard became very popular. And they had higher requirements to get into it. And so like if you went to a better school district or like talked to the right recruiter, things like that. If there's like some of these like soft social powers that you could know, like, hey, like you should apply to like work on like a U.S. merchant vessel, right? Where your whole job is just steer the boat that supplies the U.S. Navy, right? You'll go in for 3 years, you'll get out, you won't fight in the war, and you'll get a GI Bill, right? But that kind of like insider knowledge takes a certain level of like
living
social
in the
power.
right place,
exactly.
Having the right people to interact with, and the systems continue to oppress the oppressed.
Correct. Second thing, if you're going to college, babes, go ahead, feel free to stay in college. If you were in college, you couldn't be drafted. So people went to college. In fact,
is that why you got a degree? You're scared?
I'm not joking. There is a 6% increase in 20-year-old men going to college the year after that was announced. But then here's the thing. You had to kind of stay in college.
Oh.
So if you started college in like 1966 and you were getting ready to graduate in 1970 when the draft would start, you went to grad school.
Yeah.
I'm not even joking. I'm like, yay, grad school. Like, I want to know how many doctorates exist.
How many PhDs are out there just because they're like, fuck no.
Imagine getting halfway through a doctorate, the draft and the war ends, and now you got to finish up the doctorate.
Or worse, you finish the doctorate while the draft is still going on. What do you do?
This is going to be one of those fun episodes where we talk about something really sad and serious, and then 15 seconds later, it's like, get a load of this. Because here's the next one. Get a load of this. Get a load of this. You could also get married. If you were married, you did not have to get drafted.
What?
Mm-hmm. And then they realized a bunch of people were getting married to avoid the draft, because even though the draft doesn't start, they do the drawing in 1969, December of 1969, and it starts in 1970.
Right.
But obviously, like, there's political discussion about starting the draft. People are still having to register for the selective service anyways. And what gets you out of that is published. So in 1965, they announce a rule change. You can no longer just be married. You also need to be a father if you don't want to be drafted. And here is an actual statistic for you.
Oh, no.
After 1965, when marriage alone could no longer save men from the draft, there was another explosion in American fertility. According to a demographic study, and this is from the History Channel, according to a demographic study, birth rates were 13% higher across the board in 1970 than they were before the Vietnam era.
Oh my God.
When the draft lottery was first held in 1969, women whose husbands had high risk draft numbers. So in other words, if your husband's birthday was in like the first 50 numbers that were called, those women were 40% more likely to be pregnant. Like to then immediately get pregnant than spouses of husbands whose numbers were lower. What happened
if like your spouse was pregnant and you got called?
So that's a great question.
Yeah.
That's a great question. Because you're going to know what your number is, right? And then if you're like 1A, that's really tough, right? Like 1A was what they called the whole batch of people that could be kind of called up any second. Okay. But if you were 1A in the 1As, like that's really tough, right? I don't know then, but I think a lot of people saw the draft and that night started having unprotected intercourse.
They were like, well,
they're like, let's not risk this.
Fair. Let's risk something else entirely.
Correct. And what I also want to point out, I'll have to get my dates right to like really confirm this, but I'm pretty sure at this time abortion is not legal in this country. Yeah. So we can send you off to war. We can choose what to do with your body. And if you're pregnant, then that gets you out of our ability to tell you what to do with your body, unless you are the pregnant person, in which, we're back to being able to tell you what you can do with your body.
Were baby boomers before this, though?
Correct. Baby boomers was your dad survived World War II, came back on a boat, and immediately shoes off.
Yeah. Making up for lost time.
Yes. In 1970, President Richard Nixon again had to change the law around fathers of families.
Oh my gosh.
Men with children were no longer automatically deferred. They now had to prove that their absence would also create a financial hardship for their dependents.
Wow.
Following that announcement, birth rates dropped again.
They were like, well,
it's not worth it. Multiple kids? No. I'd rather go fight in Vietnam. That's not me saying it.
Same
That's
kind
Dana
of.
saying it. I have a master's degree. I could analyze it.
Oh my
way.
God. Jeez Louise.
Okay. Next one. You could simply refuse to go. Your number could get called and you could not go. And a lot of people did that. Approximately 570,000 men were classified as draft offenders during the Vietnam War. So slightly more than 500,000 men had their numbers called and just did not report. And it was so many, and the government was already trying to spy on so many Americans that it was only able to prosecute and imprison 3,250 of them.
That's bad luck if you get prosecuted.
A success rate so low, you might as well just stop.
Success rate so low. Do you ever say that to your students?
I've said other things before. All of them are Patreon comments. I can't. I was about to say some of them, and I was like, "What am I doing?"
What do I do? They're right there.
Right, exactly. And so is my job. So is my work. Next option: fleeing the country, going to Canada. 60,000 Americans, roughly 30,000 American men, fled to Canada to hang out there. They flee to Canada. Nixon does not offer them a pardon. Ford does not offer them a pardon. It is our humble peanut farmer, Jimmy Carter, who's like, if you're an American living in Canada because you avoided the draft,
Jesus.
you have been forgiven. And a lot of them are like, dude, I've been here for like 5-6 years now. I got a life up here. I'm not going anywhere.
I have new credit cards.
Exactly. You could also register as a conscientious objector. So before the Vietnam War, you would have to be a Quaker, Amish, Mennonite, or Jehovah's Witness in order to be able to like not go off to war.
Yeah.
They would oftentimes still receive assignments, but it would be like mess hall instead of like active fighting or whatever.
Yeah.
And then in 1970, there's this Supreme Court case, Welsh v. United States, where a person who's like, hey, I have an objection to the war, but I'm not one of those 4 religions.
Yeah.
And the Supreme Court, this was back when they got it right, was like, you're right. You don't have to be one of those 4 religions. You just kind of have to prove in general that like
that
your religion's not cool with it.
Yeah.
And suddenly a whole bunch of radical Catholics weren't eligible for the draft anymore. Literally protected. I know.
Wild.
A total of 170,000 men received conscientious objector deferments during the war.
Wow.
61,000 of them happened in 1971 alone, and they were aided by an organization called American Friends Service Committee, which was the official outreach arm of the Quakers.
Wow.
I know. They walk the walk.
It's crazy that you could do that, and then some people, Trump got bone spurs somehow.
Managed to pay off a doctor. Actually, here's one of the things too, because you already know that the heart of the story is people would go in and burn draft records.
Yes.
They had to kind of start updating their strategy a little bit, because when you were burning draft records, you were just kind of grabbing the whole folder.
Yeah.
You were at times also burning medical notes of people being excused from the draft. It was like a doctor's letter being like, yeah, bone spurs, they can't go. And then that person had to go off and like get the doctor's note in. And that like cost time, that like cost money. And that like hit the news first. Like there's this sassy Maryland girl who she's like, and honestly, it'll be a huge inconvenience to us, but those boys put in a lot of work. There's a lot of important information in there, and not everyone can afford to go see a doctor. And I was like, girl, you're speaking on behalf of the state right now, but you're also right. It is tough to afford to go to a doctor.
You're right, but you're also like missing the point, I think.
No, fully correct. So there's all these different reasons to not like the draft. There's all these different reasons to like not like the war. But perhaps the most important one, the real fire at the heart of all of this, is that the Vietnam War is incredibly deadly. Like,
right, yes.
At the end of the conflict, some 60,000 American soldiers will have died from the war. It is estimated 2 million Vietnamese people will die from the war. And those 2 numbers do not include any numbers from Cambodia or Laos, where the U.S. conducted air raids. It also doesn't include any numbers. And I'm going to give you 20 seconds here to go ahead and like fast forward. Go ahead and fast forward now for a description of a war crime. The U.S. was actively dropping napalm on Vietnam to try to essentially burn down in a tropical forest. And napalm, one of the things that makes it so effective is that it sticks. And so young people, especially fleeing villages being bombed by the U.S. government, would get hit with napalm and it would burn on them and be almost impossible to put away. And so these numbers only include the number of dead, do not include the number of
injuries.
People permanently damaged by our actions. Also, this numbers also doesn't contain the number of American service members who would die later of disastrous cancer diagnoses from their exposure to Agent Orange.
Yes, that's what I was going to ask.
All suffering is bad. I understand that they were facilitating war crimes, but also most of them were there
drafted.
out of the fact that they were kind of forced to be there. And it's complicated. The people who should have been held responsible were being protested at the time. And one of them, Henry Kissinger, is still alive if you want to go and talk to him.
Forgot about that. He was also in Bohemian Grove for some reason.
Correct. And so I guess you could say, and I have chapter titles for the other ones, but this is the first chapter title I'm saying out loud.
Okay.
I guess you could say it's kind of all a bucket of shit. So in September of 1965, 19-year-old Barry Bondis received his notice that he needed to report to the Selective Service Office.
Okay.
That way he could register for a draft. He went to the Minneapolis office for his physical and psychological test. And on his paperwork, he listed his birthplace as Earth and his race as human. He and his father, Tom, then sat down to talk to the people and tried to get exempted on religious grounds. That then sent him to the draft board in Elk River if you're looking for an exemption.
Yeah.
They had another interview. And Barry Bondis's dad, Tom, said he was super concerned about a potential draft because Tom had 12 sons. To which the draft board asked, well, where are they? Essentially like, let's get them registered too.
What?
It infuriates Tom and Barry so much. They go home, and I now have to read this directly.
Tom's the dad.
Tom's the dad, Barry's the son.
Right.
So they basically like, well, then where's the rest of you? So Tom and Barry came up with an interpretation that rest meant residue, and residue meant waste. So they put a couple of pails in their bathroom and collected waste in them, like human waste in them. And then on February 23rd, 1966, Barry took his buckets of waste to the draft board. His initial plan seems to have just been to place the buckets on the secretary's desk and say, here's the rest of my brothers. Like, here's the people that you're going to waste. But once he was in there, he had another idea. And that was to dump it all over the filing cabinets and destroy all of the records.
Incredible.
That December, Barry Bondis was convicted of damaging government property and interfering with the Selective Service. This story, by the way, comes to us from the podcast Stuff You Missed in History Class, which is really fun.
Yeah.
And this is the first time someone has ever kind of like intentionally damaged draft records of people, not just themselves, of like loads of people. And
that happened before the blood thing from the beginning? Whoa.
And so it kind of inspires a movement because Barry's religious exemption like is true. Like he religiously feels like he should not go. I think pouring shit over draft cards was kind of like a moment of anger and frustration.
Yeah.
I don't think that bridge, I don't think Barry crossed the bridge between the two, but others were.
Okay.
So from one to a movement. Less than a year after Barry Bondis is found guilty, the four activists from the start of the show destroy the records in what is now called the Baltimore Four.
Wow.
And they wanted to get arrested because they wanted to put on a show.
Hell yeah.
They wanted people to hear their case and what they did. Guilty of destroying records? Yes. Guilty of a crime? No. So, of course, those four are found guilty.
Yeah.
However, while on trial, they hatch a new plot. They're still out on bail. They're not in jail yet.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to do it again because they have all this media attention on them right now.
Right.
Okay. And so they try to get a bigger group to get even more notoriety. They recruit 7 other people to join them. So there's 9 of them now. And here's who they are. I'm also going to give for several of them their titles. So there's George Mersch, who's part of the original Baltimore Four.
Okay.
And the other from the Baltimore Four, Father Philip Berrigan, a Josephite priest.
Okay.
Joseph brings his brother, Father Daniel Berrigan, a Jesuit priest. There's
incredible.
also Brother David Darst, a De La Salle Christian brother. There's John Hogan, Tom Lewis, Marjorie Bedford Melville, a former Mary Knoll sister, Thomas Melville, a former Maryville priest, and Mary Moylan, who, while never officially a nun or a sister, served as a nurse on many Catholic healthcare missions to Africa specifically.
This feels like the beginning of that joke that's like a priest, a rabbi.
But it's like a priest, a
another
brother.
priest, a brother, a nun.
A girl who just really likes priests.
Yeah.
All walk into a draft board office.
Guess what they do.
So all 9 of these individuals had served either directly with the church or alongside the church in a couple of different communities. They had either witnessed extreme poverty that's been created by the war. They witnessed extreme poverty in the U.S. They witnessed extreme poverty elsewhere.
Right.
They worked with people at the time the term was third world country. That's not a term we use anymore, but some of the primary sources will show that. Developing economy, like developing and developed. Third world sounds like third class, and that's like
it doesn't make sense.
Right, it's actually
what even is a second class country? I don't know.
Right, exactly. But had essentially like lived in places where people experienced poverty, where life expectancies were shorter, and felt a deep humanity connection to the people of these places. They understood that like these people don't care if their country's communist or not. I mean, sure, maybe they did to a certain degree, but these people, they want to work their fields. They want to do their job. If they're a merchant, they want to like celebrate their local customs. They want to get married. They want to like have children. They want to live a life that when they were born, they were promised.
Right.
They don't care about these geopolitical moves. And I think what the anti-war movement will show is that even the average American doesn't really care about these geopolitical moves.
Right.
That like that is actually what we all have in common with each other. That like redrawing lines on a board and increasing corporate profit just is not a thing that's going to get me up in the morning.
No.
You know? And so they feel a deep connection to these people. And I also think a deep sympathy that they understand that the South Vietnamese especially have almost no power to stop the conflict.
Yeah.
And so they feel deeply moved by their entire experience. They feel actively, non-ironically, called by their religion to do something about this. And they end up asking some really important questions to themselves, to each other, and then larger to all of America.
Right.
Like, for instance, what does the average American get from destroying the homes of the Vietnamese people? From killing them? How can such intense poverty still exist in America? And yet we spend this much money on weapons of death. As members of the church, they were excluded from being drafted and felt the need to do something more than just march. And so they did. They found out that the Baltimore 4 raid from the draft board offices, the like local offices that actually conduct most of this stuff, they found out something really crucial. They don't keep duplicate copies of the draft cards.
That just seems like such a obvious error.
Correct. Well, here's the thing. The draft cards take a long time to produce. And then because you literally have them for essentially half the country's population, it's like a substantial amount of cards. And so when you destroy the draft cards, they're gone. They can be recreated through like the other information they have. Like obviously they had to be created at one point so they could be like recreated.
Yeah.
But like if you're the local draft board in your community, like, you know, an 18, 19-year-old comes of age, like maybe get 3 a week. So you put together like 3 draft cards in a week. Someone breaks in and burns 10,000 cards in 5 minutes. Like they
don't pay me enough.
No, they don't. They don't pay you enough. But also like the local draft board offices, and this is something that I learned during this research of this episode, they conduct almost all of the actual facilitating of the drafting, right? They do like a lot of like the medical review. They make recommendations to like a larger draft board. They like handle a lot of this paperwork and they store a bunch of this stuff. And then you might get sent off the processing, right? Or like it gets submitted and stuff. But if you disable these local community offices, then for that community, the draft literally stops for a little bit, not figuratively. It's not like a hollow emotional victory.
Yeah,
you are delaying the draft by a couple of weeks, right? And if you can do this enough time in enough places, and you stretch out and you slow down the machinery of war, and you make the supply of fresh bodies into this meat grinder harder and harder to keep consistent, you change what has to then be a priority, and that's what their goal is. They're like, we're not going to hurt anybody. And they go in and they destroy it. And the first thing they do, they get interviewed and they're like, aren't you ashamed that you would destroy property like this? And they go, pause. We went in there and destroyed property. And in this country, we place this huge importance on property. But we don't place any importance on life. We destroyed property that was going to destroy life. And that's why we destroyed that property.
Damn.
Yeah, no, they're all so poetic because either they're like college kids or like literally Jesus though. They're like literally priests and nuns, and they have wrestled with moral questions and they have figured out how to express it to like a general population. So if you destroy these draft cards, it will literally take them hundreds of hours to recreate.
That's wild.
So on May 17th, 1968, the 9 went into the Cantonsville office of the Selective Service on Fredericks Road in Maryland. They restrained an employee while gathering all of the records into a bin. The employee, Mary Murphy, attempted to save the records, but like had to kind of be like held down, maybe tied down just a little bit.
Yeah.
And then they took the bins out to the parking lot and set fire to them. They then recited the Lord's Prayer and explained
Wild.
It's actually
that's so wild.
You watch this news clip because they're filming it, and like there's news people there who are filming it. They have this. They're like emptying these piles, and then they throw napalm on it because you can make napalm at home.
That's poetic.
Correct. And then they light it on fire. And in the video, you can see napalm goes up so quickly that the guy who like throws a match, like kind of like, like kind of jumps back and like kind of gets burnt a little bit. Like you can see him like shaking this, like it's an explosion. It's a mini explosion. And then with this pile of napalm covered draft cards, they like join hands in the center and say the Lord's Prayer out loud, like the Our Father who aren't in heaven prayer.
That's poetic.
Like sing hymns, they hug each other, and they wait to be arrested.
Damn, Jackie.
While they were in jail, the group organized and sent an apology letter and a basket of flowers to the clerk they had to detain during this whole incident.
That's wild.
And they have decided they're going to try to go for the strategy called jury nullification.
Okay.
Where it's like, I'm guilty, but for a good reason.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay,
like, I'm going to say not guilty so you can find me not guilty and I can get out of here.
Leave.
I did it. I did that part, but I don't think it's a crime. If caring too much is a crime, then I guess I'm guilty, but that's not a crime. So find me not guilty. Yeah. It's kind of the idea of jury nullification. But they're also talking a little bit about how they are prepared to go to jail. They think the longest they'll have to serve is potentially 3 years, right? Like they are kind of ready to go. And as one of them said, if you're a nun or a priest and you have gone through seminary, you are well trained for prison. Because it's like a very simple diet. Yeah. It's like a lot of reading and like reflection. They were like, a 1 to 3 year prison sentence does not intimidate people who feel literally compelled by the God they've devoted their life to try to do something to end this war. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so then here comes one of my favorite little stories.
Wild.
So there's 9 of them, right? Mm-hmm. They get found guilty. They need to go turn themselves in. 4 of them turn themselves in. Okay. 5 of them decide to go on the run. Of the 4 that turned themselves in, it's the former priest and the former nun who fell in love. That's why they're former, not current.
Okay.
And that had happened like kind of within the last couple of months. Like had fallen in love, gotten married, and he says in the interview,
I want to watch that rom-com so bad.
You don't understand. The line's so perfect. He looks at the camera and he goes, "Yeah, I knew Mary and I knew Philip and Daniel were going to go on the run, but I just kind of wanted to get in, do my service, and get out. I had been celibate long enough." He was like,
my gosh.
"We're going to punch in, punch out, and then we're going to punch in, punch out."
Oh my God.
And his wife was like, because she was going to prison too. Yeah. They did like, I think ultimately that couple, especially like 6 months with like good behavior and stuff, essentially. So 5 hit the road. 3 are caught almost right away. They're kind of like too notorious to traveling in a group. Of the 5 that go away, 4 of them are men, including 2 of the priests. Okay. And then one of them is Mary Moylan, the not nun kind of nun who did all these works. Okay.
Groupie. Groupie.
Right. So this now comes from Cornell University in New York, where Father Daniel Bergen was working. Father Daniel Bergen was sentenced to 3 years in prison to begin on April 9th, 1970. According to Anke Wessels.
What?
Anke.
No.
Anke Wessels.
That's wild.
Director of Cornell's Center for Religion, Ethics, and Social Policy. On the very day he was scheduled to begin his prison term, he left his office keys on his secretary's desk in Annabelle Taylor Hall and disappeared. Cornell marked Berrigan's impending imprisonment by conducting a week-long, quote, "America is hard to find" event, which included a public appearance by the now fugitive Berrigan, where he spoke to a crowd of 15,000 people, 15,000 people in Barton Hall. He then hit the road for the next 6 months, and on August 11th, 1970, the FBI found and arrested Berrigan at the home of William Stringfellow and Anthony Town, 2 gay artists who were harboring a Catholic priest because they were all anti-war. I know.
Wait!
I know. Meanwhile, Mary Moylan's the real pro.
Yeah.
The FBI literally could never find her.
Oh my God. She was ready.
Yes, she went underground and lived a life that she described as nomadic poverty. Her friends and allies appealed to Jimmy Carter in 1976 to pardon her like he had Patty Hearst.
Yeah.
And he refused. I know.
What?
Mary Moylan misses her own mother's funeral because she thinks the FBI will stake it out. So she spends a lot of time in like women's convents and religious and like community support like organizations. She like stays underground until eventually she gets tired of being on the road. And so in 1979, she turns herself into the FBI. And
what to do with a problem like Mary Moylan?
Correct. She serves 1 year at Alderson Prison, West Virginia, which is, yes, in fact, the exact same prison Martha Stewart will go to 20 years later. I really did my work in that paragraph.
That's wild.
I was like, how many more references can I get in this paragraph before we keep going? Okay, so this works.
Yeah.
Catonsville 9, huge news now, right?
Yeah.
And that means there's a template. And it works, this agitation works in a couple of really interesting ways. The people who were organizing this were members of the church.
Yeah.
Which meant there was already this network there for them.
Yes.
They went to, well, I don't know what conventions for priests are called, but you know, like they get to, I don't think it's called convents because, you know, but you know what I'm talking about, right?
Sure.
There's like a communication system within it. Like they are already writing to each other regularly. There are places they can go. Also, fun little fact. I mean, it's not true in the U.S. anymore. We rescinded this law about a month ago. But it used to be that the U.S. government would not enter sanctuaries. And that means churches. Right. That was a huge thing during the fugitive slave movement in the 1850s and 1860s. Slaves would hide out in churches along the Underground Railroad because the U.S. government wouldn't raid them. And so he's going around for 6 months talking to people, spreading the news. People are hearing about it within their Catholic. Like there's whole on Catholic newspapers that are written by, quote, Catholic radicals that Catholic priests oftentimes just get at the church as part of like this like a larger system. And so the system exists in a way that's very different than like student activism and civil rights groups exist. And also the template's like pretty simple. You go in, you grab a bunch of cards, you burn them.
You destroy them somehow.
Right. You pray and then you get arrested.
Yeah.
They called it hit and stay. Like hit it and then stay. I am working through... I'm working through a couple of different working titles for this episode. But the first one that I'm thinking about is hit, stay, pray.
How do you do this?
I think you're going to like the other one too.
Oh my God.
So we'll have a chance to let the audience vote. No, I'm kidding. Okay. With Father Berrigan in jail and the other Father Berrigan on the run and preaching, the resistance took off. As one newspaper classified it upon Father Daniel Berrigan's eventual arrest from the FBI, quote, he was everywhere and seemed available to everyone, except that is the police.
These are my favorite kinds of stories.
When you can get like a gem from an article from the time.
Oh,
just like
that's so good.
A sassy man in 1970. Yes. Thank you.
He has like a brandy in one hand and a pen in the other.
Correct.
Yeah.
And with the message clear and format now road tested, groups and cells are able to pop up on their own.
Okay.
I don't know if you remember that as part of my ELF episode, where they were like, we're disseminating this information. We want you to start your own cell. We don't want you to contact us.
Right.
We don't want there to be a link that they can like web it all together to. This is how you do it. Go do it. And groups do that exactly, which is great news for us. Yeah. Terrible news for the FBI, who's at that time quietly, secretly, and illegally running counterintelligence operations against a whole host of left-wing organizations.
And like a lot of it is going for some reason on Sinatra.
He's actually kind of in a lot of these groups because here's the group. Black Panthers, the SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee.
Right.
That was John Lewis's group.
Right.
Other civil rights movements, queer liberation movements, anti-war movements, and now the left-wing Catholics movement. An organization, a movement that does not require you to be connected to any part of the web to do the action is a really hard organization.
Yeah, it's a really hard web.
So I'm going to say that one more time very slowly. An organization that does not require a web to support itself is really hard for authoritarian states to track down. And we continue. I can't leave the country over the next 4 years.
Yeah,
I know that
I'm
much.
gonna be detained.
So one group in Milwaukee is known as the, you guessed it, Milwaukee 14.
That's so funny.
It just becomes the number of people and the city that it took place in.
What happens if the number changes? Do you stay the 14?
Every action is, well, so that's a great question.
Okay.
Because there's a group up in Minnesota called Beaver 55. I'm not even joking. And Beaver 55 does a lot of actions, never once, but 55 people.
It's like that classic senior prank that everyone always gets told about, where you get like the greased up pigs and you put 1, 2, 4 in there.
Well, I also love the idea of Beaver 55. It sounds like a local Boy Scouts lodge.
It does. All of this sounds like veterans posts,
Right.
which is just like really fucked up.
It's like, welcome to draft card burning lodge Beaver 55.
Yeah.
Welcome. We're thrilled to have you, you know? Okay, so the Milwaukee 14 go into the Milwaukee offices, which are actually like a gathering place of like at least a dozen different draft board offices, collect all of that stuff and burn thousands of draft cards. They release a statement as they're getting arrested. I'm not able to find the full thing for whatever reason. Our news agency didn't feel the need to like archive a lot of these statements from the 1960s and 70s. So it should hopefully remind you guys of the importance of like documenting
media.
things on paper, and that like an internet that can be controlled by the government can be erased by the government. So just keep that in mind.
Womp, womp.
The statement read this: "We who burn these records of our society's war machine are participants in a movement of resistance to slavery, a struggle that remains as unresolved in America as in most of the world." Yeah. Huge.
Yeah, dude.
And so we're going to do another moment where we pause and reflect and connect like this to modern activism. These movements were not popular. Local, well-to-do, go-with-the-flow people thought, oh, sure, I hate the war. I think it's terrible what's happening over there, but I could never get behind property damage. They're never going to talk about burning Teslas positively.
Oh, my God.
You know, they're never going to talk about property. And I'm making this really clear. Property damage. None of these organizations ever injured a person. The person they injured the most, who they like tied down in a chair, got flowers.
Yeah.
And also, that was the person they interviewed. That was the person she was like, you have no idea how many medical records are in the things they just put. Like, she was fine enough to give an interview that day at the site.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
These were not popular. The Milwaukee Centennial wrote an article that weekend in 1970 during the Milwaukee 14 where like 450 students marched downtown yelling, "Thank you, thank you, thank you," outside the prison. And they shouted loud enough to obscure the counter poster. It was just yelling, "Kill, kill, kill." A Milwaukee Centennial poll from that weekend found 60% of respondents felt that the Milwaukee 14 were, I have it quoted here, just trying to cause trouble. Of the people they polled, only 25% of the people in the Milwaukee Centennial believed that they were doing what their conscience directed them to do.
Whoa.
At least 3 priests and nuns were arrested in the Milwaukee 14 collection. I remember pointing out this too. They're polling an American public whose sons could be drafted.
Yeah.
We get to a point in the Vietnam War where 1 in every 2 Americans knows a person who's died in the war, or at least been drafted and is fighting in it.
Yeah.
Like, this is a personal conflict. It can't get closer to home for some of them. And you're still going to run into respectability politics, where it's like the only politics that is acceptable is the politics that I can ignore. And that's the issue with trying to win over like a base that's not going to.
True.
But what you're trying to do is move what's called the Overton window. Do you know what the Overton window is? The Overton window is essentially the things that a general public finds acceptable, right? Mm-hmm. So like pineapple on pizza is like this great option. We're like on the internet, people have been loud the last couple of years about how they like pineapple on pizza, and it's moving the Overton window.
Just
to
good,
before
honestly.
It was like a slam dunk joke, and now it's like a hot take to have, right? That's like a very simplified version of the Overton window.
Also, if you don't like pineapple on your pizza, grow the fuck up.
Right. Correct. Right.
Thank you.
What you just said
Yeah.
would have been brave 5 years ago. Okay. Unfortunately, the Overton window also works with political violence. So when you commit political violence, even if it's like condemned, it happened in the news. And then if it happens again, it like reinforces this window a little bit. Over the last 5 to 10 years, the right-wing fascist leaders of this country have done a wonderful job of moving the Overton window, right? Like, we did not have an appropriate response to the Charlottesville March. And instead what happened was the Overton window got moved, right?
Yeah.
Like, arrests should have happened. Like, a crackdown on that kind of language should have occurred. And most importantly, thought leaders from that side of the political aisle needed to make sure it was clear that that wasn't an appropriate thing to do.
Right.
That didn't happen. No. And the Overton window grew and shifted to make that something that only 1% of the society thought was okay, becomes 5% of the society thinks it's okay. And now it becomes, instead of this fringe thought, an extreme thought. And then it just becomes a far right thought. And then it becomes a thought, right? That's the Overton window, okay? But the start of that Overton window, which has obviously been used for evil, but can also be used for good, around pushing people's perceptions about what is acceptable. Like, for instance, gay marriage, total Overton window in the other direction, right? Yeah. Whereas beforehand, it was totally okay to be like, I just personally don't agree with same-sex marriage. You can't really say that on cable news anymore as like a character without you coming to some like realization at the end of it.
You have to have a character growth.
Correct. That's Overton window in the other direction. You move the Overton window by doing things that are not popular. Yeah. But you do them a couple of times and you try to limit the actual impact. Like, that was the other thing too. Like, the Charlottesville protest resulted in, and I'm not trying to dismay anyone's suffering, quote, only one death. Right?
Yeah.
And so the window can move a little bit. So what I'm trying to say is they're never going to give you props for burning a Tesla. But like, for reals, if you are upset about what is going on, like, burn a fucking Tesla. Like, get out there. Try to make sure no one's in it. Don't blow it up around others. Yeah. But you're also removing a dangerous vehicle from the road. So like, thank you. Right? But there are other ways of doing that too. Right?
The Cybertruck on fire really is the moment where you were like, wow, that building would look beautiful on fire. That's me with the Cybertruck.
Yes, 100%. So where there's smoke,
I'm
there's
really
fire.
getting detained.
We're staying in City County, Denver, the next 4 years. Yeah. So more smoke, because as something happens, it happens on the news, and then it happens elsewhere, and none of these cells are talking or coordinating with each other. And so 2 months after the Milwaukee 14, the Boston 8 strike. On November 10th, 1969, another raid happens. This time it happens in Boston, and they manage to seize 10% of the state's draft files. But this time they do something different. They do it at night.
Wait, so is this the second one in Boston? Like right in a row?
There's Baltimore, and then there was Maryland at large. Okay. And then there was Milwaukee. Okay. And now we're in Boston.
Okay. I thought you said like Milwaukee and then Boston again.
Sorry, no, Milwaukee 14, Boston 8.
Okay.
They don't wait to get arrested. They book it this time. And they release this statement.
Can't even be mad.
Right. They're like, we're the Boston 8, and here's what we have to say. Quote, if you feel as we do that marching and demonstrating are unproductive, we encourage you to take responsible action to secure peace and end injustice. We have fashioned hope with our bodies as free people must do. We oppose with our lives genocide in Vietnam and the arms race exploitive investment abroad, the rape of foreign manpower and resources, domestic racism, environmental ruin, and militarism in any form. A couple weeks later, the Boston 8 march in Washington, D.C. in a massive anti-war protest and go turn themselves into the FBI. And they're like, what? No, get out of here. Go. Leave. Because the FBI is like, every time we arrest them, they go to trial and another one happens. So it's like, if we just ignore them, maybe they'll go away
eventually.
It doesn't. It actually continues to spread. Eventually.
What are you doing here?
Like, so many times I'm like, the FBI just needed to hire like an media person, like a singular
Hoover
person.
is just like, that's Sinatra.
Exactly. Sure. But what about the gays? What are you going to do about that? You know?
Yeah, he was just always kind of on the wrong target.
Right. So here's honestly, I think maybe one of my favorite things I'm about to say to you. It's so funny. Okay, so more organizations pop up.
Okay.
They are again targeting draft board offices. They do kind of start to lose the religious thread a little bit as more of them pop up. Of the Boston 8, 3 of them were nuns or priests.
That's
But like Beaver 55, it's unknown.
We don't even know how many people were in there.
Correct.
Was it 55?
The ones that have been identified as Beaver 55 members were not priests or religious leaders, but were targeting draft boards.
Okay.
And then there was an organization that conducted an action in New York City.
Okay.
And their name was Women Against Daddy Warbucks.
God, I love women.
They rated...
That's incredible.
I actually wonder if that's where we got the phrase Daddy Warbucks from, because they became feminist icons. 4 of them got arrested immediately. And another one was like, I'm going to go underground for a little bit. There's a lot of people who do one really cool thing and then go underground. I haven't named all of them. There was one of the stories where I was like, there's so many names and they're all really cool. And I'm hoping they're proud of themselves. I'm not going to keep introducing main characters. Right?
No,
we're going to paint movements here.
I love that.
So the Women Against Daddy Warbucks broke into offices in Upper Manhattan, which is kind of like Harlem, Spanish Harlem, and then also Queens.
Okay.
And stole a bunch of draft records. This is important because as raiding draft board offices become more and more popular, they specifically start to target draft board offices in low-income communities and communities of color. They're like, we are actively dismantling a system of racism that would see their lives as expendable and not treat them as equal back in this
you
country.
also said like one of the easiest ways to get out of it was to enlist, but they made it harder to enlist or like understand your options. Right. And if you were in lower income areas, because that's not where they're sending their quality people.
Correct. And they also recognize as college educated, well made up white people, they have the ability to commit activism in a way that the individuals being disproportionately targeted by the system don't. And they need to put their bodies in the way of that, which is, by the way, like not a revolutionary thought. Like this is an event that happened literally 50 years ago, guys. Like I watched that documentary earlier today. It's clear not all of them are still alive to be on the interview. Like, but like some of them still are, you know? So Women Against Daddy Warbucks raid, all of these places in Upper Manhattan and Queens, and then invite the press to Rockefeller Center the next day.
Where incredible.
They throw confetti in the lobby of Dow Jones Chemical, the largest producer of materials needed to make napalm. And before you ask, yes, the confetti was, of course, made out of shredded draft cards.
There's some intern, their boss was like, put them back together.
Right, a little bit. Piece it together. I don't want to go through all those records.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
They say this at the time. We acted together as women against the draft because conscription rests on women's accepted role as insulated comforter and supporter of violence.
Whew.
Yeah, they're doing things that felt revolutionary for us to hear in 2020 and was actually 50 years old. So
incredible.
As you can kind of tell, around this time, they kind of start having a little fun. They realize that the U.S. government is starting to view them as like a large threat, and all they're really doing is shredding paper.
Which is hysterical.
They do a wonderful job of naming themselves in a way that like plays fun at that.
Yeah.
Women Against Daddy Warbucks, for instance, is one.
Yeah.
This next one, the East Coast Conspiracy to Save Lives.
What case are you working on these days, honey? It has you so stressed
out. Huge conspiracy theory. The East Coast
save lives.
To save lives. The East Coast
Am I married to the villain?
The East Coast Conspiracy to Save Lives targets offices in Philadelphia, again, targeting specifically low-income and black neighborhoods. They also attempt to knock out the entire state of Delaware's draft system for a couple of days.
Hell yeah.
And kind of achieve it, but they also do something really important too. On the same night that they are targeting things in Philadelphia, in Washington, D.C., a second team of the East Coast Conspiracy to Save Lives is raiding the offices of the lobbyist of General Electric, the second largest benefactor of military spending, and release the items to the press.
Wow. sometimes like humanity do go hard.
They
you
get
know?
it right. They're like, hey,
Yeah.
like it's literally an industrial war machine.
Yeah.
Like, look at what we have pulled right here.
Yeah.
And then this is something I want to read. So I'm going to read a brief description and then I'm going to see if I can. Okay. So here's two things. This comes from one of the conspirators, obituary, Miss Charlotte Lacey. Charlotte was 18 years old when, on one night in 1970, she, along with 10 nuns, priests, and young people, simultaneously burglarized 3 of the 4 Philadelphia draft boards, destroying the files of these young men about to be involuntarily sent to Vietnam to kill or be killed. The group also burglarized the lobbying offices of GE in Washington. The GE documents taken exposed collusion between Congress and GE, the second largest war contractor at the time.
Wow.
And then I want to read this. I was able to actually find their like published manifesto. We're not going to read all of it, obviously, for time, but there's a couple of just absolute bangers on here. As American citizens, we share a responsibility for the actions of our country. We have liberated draft files in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and General Electric files in Washington, D.C. We have done so because of our concern for human life. We have done so because we are aware of the conspiracy among the military, large corporations, and the United States government. We have done so because institutions operating in the United States. And we have done so because through our acting, we have found a new lifestyle which offers opportunity and hope for ourselves and others.
Damn. Oh yeah, girl, get your tits out.
Do I want to read this one? Yes, I do. It's 4 pages. I'm going to read this, and then I'm just going to read their bios, like the like 1-sentence bio.
Yeah.
We have destroyed draft files, pieces of paper, because those pieces of paper mean slavery and possible death for young Americans, and certain death for Vietnamese and other non-white people of the third world. The draft is an instrument of murder, and as such, it must be stopped. It is no accident that the boards we have acted against are inner city boards. Blacks, poor whites, working class whites, those society treats worst, are forced to do most of the fighting and dying in America's wars. Since American racism destroys their free choice, this racism fosters a type of frustration which is at the root of our deteriorating society. We specifically reject the racism that sends its victims in highly disproportionate numbers to the front lines of battle. Here is their like one sentence, we the undersigned bios. I'm just going to do first names because there's a lot of Italian names.
Fair enough.
Nancy, 22, liberated February 6th, 1970, like joined the movement.
Okay, yeah.
Richard Bedwell, 39, Jesuit priest from Boston.
Nice.
Susan, 32, member of the Dominican Sisters of Grand Rapids. Susan, 30, religious sister since 1957. John Finnegan, 22, formerly from Phoenixville, Pennsylvania. Peter, 32, Jesuit priest. Ted, resistance organizer. An 18-year-old, that's our Charlotte. 3 more priests and a nun.
Damn.
And so you get this cool political action moment, and it's happening during a time when things are spiraling. So in 1970, when Richard Nixon takes office at the start of 1969, 31,000 Americans have already been killed. We're going to get into now the deadliest part of the conflict, and things are kind of going everywhere. And this is where kind of our story reaches its big climactic moment. Because these draft board office raids are kind of clearly doing something.
Yes.
Like the state of Rhode Island couldn't draft people for a while because one of the raids was so big.
Small.
Correct. And it was like the Rhode Island Political Operatives for Freedom organization, which its acronym was RIPOFF.
Nice.
Like they're doing such a good job branding themselves.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
And it kind of culminates in 2 giant things in 1971. Right as Americans are really actually starting to turn against the war, finally in big numbers, because it had been like a quiet majority up to that point. Richard Nixon's also trying to run for president. So it's anti-war. He's trying to end the war without embracing the anti-war movement. And he needs to kind of get a deal done before the end of 1972, because the election is in November of 1972. And so there's increased pressure on the government to end the war. these organization groups are kind of realizing that like the end could possibly be near if they just like kind of step it up a little bit more.
Right.
And two things happen. First, and again, it's an incredible name. The Citizens Commission to Investigate the FBI.
This was the OG naming your Wi-Fi router.
Wait, that's actually deeply accurate. Yes.
Yeah.
100%. The Citizens Commission to
FBI
Investigate the FBI is an activist group that essentially operated for a year and a half.
Incredible.
It manages to do something really cool. It does one thing. It targets a 2-person FBI office in the town of Media, Pennsylvania. Like, it's a tiny town, tiny little FBI office. 2 people work there. For whatever reason, that little office had thousands of classified documents that they stole and then mailed anonymously to several U.S. newspapers to expose the numerous illegal FBI operations that were infringing on First Amendment rights of American citizens. They were like, we have been telling you that the FBI is actively spying on left-wing groups, and here's the FBI going, an update on our spying
of the left-wing groups.
Most people refuse to publish it. And then the Washington Post is like, oh, well, we're going to publish this. We're going to publish this on the front page.
Love the Washington Post.
And as soon as the Washington Post does it, everyone posts it. They confirm that it's accurate and then posted it in March of 1971.
I could be wrong. Isn't the Washington Post the one that also printed
the Pentagon Papers?
I was thinking the Unabomber's manifesto.
Probably. And also, I think, helped break Watergate.
Hell
It's a hugely important newspaper for American politics.
Yeah. Remember that.
Mm-hmm.
Jeff Bezos.
Wait, it's now owned by an oligarch.
Yeah. It is Jeff Bezos, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
The complete collection of political documents ripped off from the FBI office in Media, Pennsylvania, March 8th, 1971. So the full 1,000 document collection is published like the next year. It's published in Win magazine, which is a war resistance magazine specifically. And the documents revealed an operation they called COINTERPRO. Counterintelligence program.
Dude, how do they come up with the most ridiculous ass names?
It's not, they just take the first part, and just shove it into one word.
My God.
This alone led to the Church Committee in Congress, which was this huge investigation into the workings of the FBI. And this is what the analysis came up with. According to the analysis of the documents that were taken from the FBI office, 1% were devoted to organized crime, mostly gambling.
Yeah,
look out, Lydia. 30% were manuals, other forms, and procedural matters. 40% were devoted to the political surveillance and other operations, including 2 cases involving right-wing groups, 10 concerning immigrants, and over 200 left or liberal groups. About 14% of the documents concerned draft resistance, which they viewed as different than political groups.
Wow.
And, quote, leaving the military without government permission. So bailing on the draft.
Yeah.
The remaining 15% concerned bank robberies, murder, interstate theft, and other crimes.
Great. The things that I'm like actually hoping that they solve.
Correct.
But yeah.
A plurality of their investigations were on political groups, and almost all of their investigations were on left-wing groups specifically.
Jesus Christ.
The theft resulted in the exposure of some of the FBI's most self-incriminating documents, including several documents detailing the FBI's use of postal workers, switchboard workers, and etc. to spy on Black college students and various nonviolent Black activist groups.
Good.
And then now here's the final story I want to tell you about tonight's whole story.
Yeah.
So this comes out. The Citizens Committee to Investigate the FBI pulls it off. And the FBI has no idea who did it. And they're now super embarrassed.
Oh,
but they have a pretty good idea that it was someone in the anti-war movement. So back in Camden, Massachusetts, a group known as the Camden 28 is planning this like massive attack on a draft board, like central holding office, essentially. Like they're going to go in and blow up the heating ducts to destroy all the computers and try to bring down the system.
Yeah, that's a big one.
The issue is the FBI has a man on the inside. And the FBI has made this man a promise. They say, we will arrest them before the night of the actual like event.
Sure.
And I forget what the second like promise was, but basically like we'll make sure like it's all taken care of, right? Like you'll be fine.
Yeah, let me guess, none of that happened.
No, none of it happens at all.
Yeah.
And they arrest the Camden 28 and then turn on their informant. And so the informant turns on them.
Good.
And speaks to the jury and explains basically how the 27 of the Camden 28 were like valiant and very much believed in what they were doing in their soul and like deeply inept at robberies. And that I, the informant, basically had to tell them how to do everything. And that almost all of the supplies that we used, the FBI paid for and gave to me and like encouraged to lead me down. And I essentially was used as a pawn to entrap these people who otherwise wouldn't have done this or even been able to get close to doing it if the FBI didn't like actively help them do this.
Dear straight men, when we talk about accountability, that is what we're talking about. Good God.
And so the mole flips.
Yeah.
The Camden 28 used this as an opportunity to question the FBI on their information gathering practices.
Good.
And also, because the trial begins in the spring of 1973, right after Nixon signs a peace treaty that stays good just long enough for us to pull most of our military forces out before the two sides get back to fighting again, the mood of the country is very different. It doesn't trust the FBI. It's glad the war's done. It doesn't necessarily think these kids were wrong anymore about opposing the war.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really want to see people go to jail for a war that the U.S. isn't fighting anymore.
True. Yeah.
And so they're found not guilty.
That's beautiful.
That is the story of the draft board office raids. I don't want to create this like narrative here at the end that like the war ended because of what they did.
Yeah.
I would actually argue maybe the exact opposite.
Yeah.
That like
it created more division.
Not necessarily that it created more division, but that it essentially like didn't move the needle.
Yeah.
That like the only people that like were really helped by it were the people that like did it themselves. But I don't know how much that is true because there's not a universe where these actions didn't.
We also
occur.
don't know whose draft cards they burned or destroyed.
Right. We have no idea whose lives were changed by the draft process being slowed down, right? Or who got a couple more months and got a chance to celebrate someone's birthday or whatever, right? I mean, like when these actions are taking off, we are still only halfway to the number of U.S. casualties that we'll experience. Right. But I think the lesson's still really interesting. I think it's a really interesting and powerful lesson about not being culpable to evil and at the same time not having to become evil yourself to fight against it. You know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, there's a quote in the story that I did for last week for the Kings of Tupelo that like two different, I think James Everett Dutschke quotes it at one point like on the phone from prison.
Right.
And then another one is like a lawyer or something that works in the town. And the quote is by like Nietzsche or something is like, don't fight monsters lest you become one.
Right.
And the fact that they both quoted him separately, one from jail and one not, is just like, the irony is perfect.
Well, and what's also really interesting too is it's during this time where you see people of the cloth, like religious figures, lend credibility to these causes.
A movement,
right? His name is Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., right?
That's true.
And he oftentimes organized through the like Southern Baptist Church, but also alongside Protestant preachers up north. Like the role of religious leaders in America who viewed like the fight against poverty as a just fight, who viewed violence as almost always unacceptable, who truly did believe in like Jesus's teaching of like God created everyone and like loved everyone. I apologize if like some of this religious rhetoric is triggering, but it's like these are the elements of my religious upbringing that I took with me.
Yeah.
And it's the lack of those values in organized religion today that led me away from organized religion.
I know so many people in my life from college and before and after that either were raised religious or were religious as adults who have said outright, I would be religious if the church was not being weaponized or if the members of the church were not weaponizing themselves in this way, because it feels like the rhetoric has just shifted so much away from like the basic teaching. Like so many people can't even consider being religious because they can't consider aligning themselves with people who hate the people that they love, you know?
like, I don't know if I don't believe in God or if I don't believe in American organized religion.
Exactly.
And then I've had a revelation like very recently, like 6 months recently, that I actually don't know if I have a working definition for like God or deity that is free of like a religiously, morally superior, deeply flawed institution.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I don't know what my definition for that even is. And if I don't know what my definition for that is, then there's no way I could believe it. Right. If there's like not a thing for me to believe. And I really do feel, obviously this isn't true for everyone, but like on an organizational level, you do not see this kind of stuff anymore.
No.
Honestly, if you do, you see them arguing against immigrants, right? You see them arguing against feeding the poor. It is no secret that today, America's most publicly religious political figures vote against the interest of starving children, of elderly without health care. They vote for war and conflict.
And we do know that some of you are in our audience and are religious, but are not like that at
Right.
all. That you do exist, and we want to acknowledge that. But yeah, it feels like the majority is not that.
No.
Or is at least a lot louder.
Or like the main speaking voice that's allowed to speak from all of it. And I just think it's really interesting because what you'll see kind of coming out of this time of these religious leaders being radical is that in this later 70s and then 80s with Ronald Reagan, they become radical in the exact opposite direction, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I have a really hard time imagining Father Daniel Berrigan, who was housed by a gay artist couple, then in a decade condemning them for HIV AIDS, you know? But that change happens so quickly, which is, I think, tough. But also, like, silver linings, like, America's great moment of social justice, of like Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act, right? Like an anti-war movement kind of bringing a conflict to a close when America was not like defeated militarily at home, right? Was then followed by like a really kind man who was probably a little old, and then like a terrible period of like mean social conservatism that then produced its own counter-reaction that got us into like the Clinton and Obama years.
Right, yeah.
You know? And it sucks to be at the highest point of the like, you know, the like with what's coming next is going to be tough. But if it's circular, then that means there's still things to fight for.
It's all fine. Everything's good. I hate it here.
I feel like I ended up talking at you a lot during this episode because there was so much like history that I wanted to cover, but it wasn't like and then guess what he said episode that, you know, like your Kings of Tupelo was so fun and wonderful and was like, like a Tiger King version for our show. And then I was like,
let's talk about the draft.
Let's talk about the draft and our moral culpability when our government commits war
and
crimes.
how those are reflected in today's environment.
But I think hopefully
super chill, super lighthearted.
You are leaving with a guide to political opposition and moral relativism.
Maybe it's time for political violence against my enemies. And apparently, if you have a manifesto you want published.
Washington Post.
Yeah, hit up Washington Post.
Get it off Tumblr. Get it on Washington Post.
It's like,
so, name ideas. It'll be funny. I'm going to name it on episode and see if we end up with either of them. So it was Hit, Stay, Pray. Or the other one is Peace Criminal.
I like Hit, Stay, Pray.
I do too.
Yeah, that's good.
So then my last note.
Yeah.
Peace Criminal was a quote from the documentary where they're like, it was absurd. We were in court listening to war criminals accuse us of being peace criminals.
And I was like, wild.
Yeah. And that's like, write that down. And that was the blank note that you saw.
Oh, peace criminals. I mean, that's a good call.
Do you want to do the closing speech?
Oh my God. Who am I? Yeah, sure. It's been a year since I've done it. Why not? If you like what you heard, you can find more of us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, probably some other things. We're Well I Laughed. If you want to support the podcast and its production, you can head over to Patreon, and for $5 a month or $3 a month, you can join our little community and maybe get some extra content. If you have any listener stories you would like to submit for our next theme, which is Bump in the Night and whatever comes after that, because I have not figured out what my next story is going to be, you can email us at wellilaughtpod@gmail.com or head to our website, wellilaughed.com, where there's a couple different forms that you can use. And if you have someone that you want to threaten, wish happy birthday, happy Mother's Day, only to pet parents though, or any of the above, you can hire Grant and I on Cameo.
That was wonderful and gave me a chance to respond to you in Connect 4. So thank you for that. Well, until next time, friends. Bye.
Goodbye.